chased by the deep state, fighting for independence, thinking about revolution, looking for alternative solutions. The enemies of the deep state will tell you what others even don't dare to think. Manuel Ochsenreiter and Mateusz Piskorski.
Hello. Here is the geopolitical podcast, Guten Menschen, public enemies of the deep state. My name is Richard Gere, and on the other side we have the Dalai Lama from Poland. No, that was a joke. My name is Manuel Ochsenreiter. I'm editor-in-chief of the German news magazine Zuerst, and on the other side is my friend and colleague Mateusz Piskorski. Hello, Mateusz.
Hello from Polish plains.
From plains and bunkers.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Plains and bunkers.
Which are very far from Tibet, but nevertheless we decided to discuss a very distant topic today.
Yes, maybe not so distant, because what is happening when it comes to separatism in China can happen anytime in any other country if the Americans think that it's worthy to be supported. But tell us, what are the latest developments when it comes to Tibet?
Well, we know that a traditional tool which is often used by United States is to ignite some separatist movements in the countries which they perceive as their enemies. And as we have a huge US-Chinese confrontation now, they are starting to do that with the Chinese and with China. Even before, I think you perfectly know that we had this not only separatism but even terrorist movements, Islamic terrorist movements in Xinjiang province, in the western regions of China, also inspired partly by the US.
These are the so-called Uyghurs, or Eastern Turkmen, I think they are also.
Yes, exactly. They are, let's say, relatives to all other Turkish people, all over the world. So the US was supporting them via Turkey as well, and Turkey was involved at a certain time. But now they are going back and, let's say, reminding to all the world and the world public opinion about Tibet, which was quite forgotten for several years. I mean, it was quite fashionable to speak about Tibet, to invite the Dalai Lama, to quote Dalai Lama, and so on in the West, particularly after 1968. I mean, the Dalai Lama was a kind of inspiration by the so-called New Left and cultural left, but then in the last years, I think I have an impression that the Tibetan issue was quite, a little bit forgotten. I don't know how it was in Germany, but I suppose it was the same. Yes, am I right?
It was absolutely connected always, as you said, to this new left, new liberal movement. But anyway, also always supported, of course, by anti-communist conservative circles. But you are right, and in addition, sorry that I am now laughing a bit by, all these new age movements and all the housewives who discovered Buddhism as their path to the eternal light for themselves. Dalai Lama is, of course, like in any Western country, also in Germany, a very popular figure. His books are all bestsellers. I never understood, by the way. Did you ever? Yeah, that's a good question. Did you ever read a book of the Dalai Lama? I didn't.
Well, first, I hope you didn't mind to intend to offend the housewives who are listening to us.
No. Here goes my big hello to all housewives listening to the Guten Menschen. That was no insult. If you like the Dalai Lama, we like him as much as you do.
Yes, that's very important. Okay, when it comes to Dalai Lama, I have once when he visited Poland, I had an opportunity to listen to his speech which was so fascinating, because he was speaking things like we all want peace in the whole world, and then the people stood and applauded standing. Can you understand?
It's a little bit like an ordinary Michael Jackson song lyrics. Because you know what
it was even more primitive than Jackson song lyrics. Yes, we want peace, yes, and everyone is applauding. So it was quite shocking for me.
I had once, sorry to interrupt you, because that is exactly what reminds me. I had once a friend at university who was totally delighted by the Dalai Lama, and I asked, what is so fascinating about this man? And he told me, his words are so deep and so full of wisdom. And I asked, so what do you mean? What exactly? And then it were really sentences such as, if you start the day with a smile, it is a friendly day. And I said, God, that is what my grandma also, what she knows already, but no one is clapping hands. And she didn't write books.
So everyone was fascinated by the deep thought of Dalai Lama, or perhaps we are with you too primitive and we don't understand the hidden sense, the hidden meaning of those words. That is also possible.
An apple a day keeps the doctor away. The Dalai Lama.
Yes.
That is really that. Yeah.
Anyway, people were really fascinated by Dalai Lama himself as a kind of celebrity all over the world. Yes, as a person, as a important part of the mass culture, I think. Then, of course, we have the anti-communist fascination of maybe not Dalai Lama and his teachings, let's say, yes, but of Tibet itself, yes. And this time we are discussing this topic. We are coming back to this topic because an American U.S. Congressman, Scott Perry, a Republican, so probably a conservative guy, or at least neo-conservative guy, of course, has prepared a draft of a bill which would enable a U.S. president to recognize Tibet as I will quote the title, as a separate, independent country, separate, of course, and independent from the People's Republic of China. Yes, so this is a project of a draft of a bill which might have potential consequences. I mean, in case of, let's say, worsening of the relations between Beijing and Washington, Washington at the time might use such a thing, yes? So they might just simply recognize Tibet and recognize the so-called Tibetan government in exile, which is
in India, yes? And the Dalai Lama is head of state, right?
Exactly, he's head of state. So you have a theocracy. That could be the political system there, yes. Yeah. On the one hand, the U.S. is vehemently, furiously criticizing the theocratic model in Iran, yes. On the other hand, they praise the theocratic model in Tibet, yes. So this is, of course, a kind of another example of double standards used by the U.S. Anyway, that's quite interesting because on the one hand, they are claiming that they might in the future potentially recognize independence of Tibet. On the other hand, they are trying more and more and doing more and more to attract India as their partner there against China. And this is also very important concerning the fact that the Tibetan separatism might be used not directly by the United States. I mean, the US won't give direct support to all those separatist movements there, but India can do that, and India is doing that since 1950, when Tibet went under control of the Chinese People's Republic. Yes, so this is a kind of a historical issue which might involve not only Tibet itself as an autonomous region, which would be not so powerful, let's say, in geopolitical terms, but Tibet might be also a part of rivalry between India and China, which is quite important now, as the US is trying to reignite or to inspire another conflicts and clashes on the Indian-Chinese border lately. Yes. Part of this border is the border with Tibet, of course, yes. So this seems to be quite dangerous for the stability of the whole region there, of the whole borderlands between China and India. Well, what do you think? Will Narendra Modi, the Indian leader and prime minister, agree to realize American strategy in this part of Asia?
Well, I think that Modi on the one side is, of course, I think he is very busy with his anti-Muslim policy he is conducting in India, where he is also seeking for some support from the West. But I don't think that he is so much deeply interested to get in a deep conflict with the People's Republic of China. I can imagine that for the Indian head of state alone, the presence of the Tibetan government in exile, which is there since there is a Tibetan government in exile, is a burden. I can imagine that Modi will try to do a swing policy. On the one side, not to bother too much the Chinese interests, but on the other side, of course, not to get into any conflict with the West and with the United States. I think he will do some swing policy. He has for sure an agenda also or a much more powerful agenda and more important agenda from the Indian point of view when it comes to Kashmir and to Pakistan. So I think that he is not focusing so much on China, that he's a guy who is focusing on his Muslim neighborhood, like Pakistan, for example. So I cannot imagine that he is very much interested to escalate more conflicts than those he wants to escalate under his control. And these are the conflicts with, on the one side, the Muslim population inside India, where is a lot of trouble also lately, or since now several years, and of course with the neighbor of Pakistan. But I wanted also to mention something else, what is interesting. When we speak about Tibet, we don't just speak about this country at the Himalaya and with its borders. We speak about a real big and powerful PR machine. Because why does almost everyone who is also just slightly politically interested in the West know about Tibet? But nobody knows, for example, there is a separatist or a regionalist movement, for example, in Poland, in Silesia, as you know. But I doubt that many people know about that. But why? Because Silesia, they don't have the money, they don't have the influence, they don't have congressmen in US who are on their payroll, most probably. Tibet is a role model and is a very good example for a powerful PR machine of people rallying for the interest who often don't even know. You were saying very correctly that we speak about a theocracy and not just about not something like the Vatican where everyone is looking and knowing how things are. We have to say that that this monk system is a very draconic and brutal system. It bases on exploitation of the farmers, of the poor. They have to feed the monks and so on. So we speak about a very patriarchic, draconic system under the Dalai Lama, supported because of the PR by feminists all over the West, by liberals all over the West.
Yes,
so that's quite interesting in this context.
Manuel, but by the way, all this huge PR campaign, if I'm not wrong, was started many years ago. I guess it was before the Second World War by the Germans.
Yeah, Heinrich Harrer.
Every let's say Western power or superpower which had some geopolitical ambitions yes, try to play the Tibetan card there. Yes, I guess so. So that's why there was a huge interest.
But we went there to search for hollow earth for the entrance.
Yes,
that's something very else. You know that.
Yes, I know, and for the Indo-European roots there and so on. Yes,
that was also for Poland's benefit what we did there. Don't forget. Don't forget that.
I really appreciate that. Yes. So
you're welcome.
Anyway,
you're welcome.
From the cultural. Okay, I'll count on you next time. Yes, during your expedition somewhere. Yes.
Okay. No
anyway, I guess that well, to be honest, of course, the Tibetan culture. I mean, some let's say currents of Tibetan Buddhism are quite interesting intellectually. Yes, so we are not talking about Tibet now to somehow underestimate their let's say cultural
just
worth.
Let me defend myself now in one sentence. I was now just telling out of the perspective of the Western liberal. I am myself totally okay with the multipolar world and that, for example, the Tibetan society is choosing the way they are living. I was speaking out of the perspective of a Western liberal third-wave feminist who is painting a Tibetan flag on her garage door to express her support for the government in exile of Tibet. That is what I said. So for those people,
yes, exactly. Yeah. For those who don't have any idea what Tibet is and what are the traditions of Tibet and social, political, and cultural factor, of course. So anyway, but let's go back to the contemporary problem there in Tibet, and not only in Tibet. Well, I guess that the US will do everything now in all those, let's say, three fragile points when it comes to the territorial integrity of China. To somehow disturb the Chinese, yes, from within, or theoretically, officially from within. The first point is, of course, Taiwan, and I guess very soon we'll have some perhaps limited scale conflict there. That's quite predictable. I mean, not the main island Taiwan, but the small islands surrounding Taiwan. Mm-hmm. Then you have, of course, Tibet, which is on the second place now, and I also would expect a campaign, a huge campaign, a PR campaign, a black PR against China, of course, when it comes to Uyghurs.
Yes.
We have already witnessed that campaign, and that is quite important for the West because, when it comes to Tibet, well, you cannot attract the Muslim people, I mean Muslim populations in Europe, in the West, as well as the Muslims in other countries, in the Middle East, for instance, in Pakistan, for instance, by telling them about the fate of Dalai Lama and the Tibetan Buddhists. Exactly. Yes, but you can try, for instance, to attack the main ally of China in the region, which is Pakistan, by trying to show everyone and to tell everyone that China is a kind of anti-Islamic state, that it, let's say, violates all religious freedoms in Xinjiang province and so on. Yes, so that might be another point quite important, but Tibet, what I mean is that Tibet is for the West and for the Westerners,
exactly,
because of its huge PR it has. You have mentioned, yes.
I have a quiz question for you. Let me see if you know that. Do you know? And don't Google now. Do you know where the Uyghur World Congress is located?
The Uyghur World Congress?
Yes.
Well, I would guess that somewhere in Turkey. Yes, am I right?
In Munich.
In Munich.
in Munich, and as far as I know, not so far from the Turkish consulate. And guess who is a frequent guest there, also for events and so on. So, what I want to say is, well, first of all, Bavaria used to be a hub. I mean, Munich is the capital of Bavaria, and that would be, by the way, somewhere in future its own podcast topic, because Bavaria after World War II was American occupation zone, and the city of Munich is hosting a lot of those separatist movements from Cold War times. So we have there not just the Uyghur movement located there, we have there also the so-called Free Ukrainian University, and the Ukrainian government in exile during the Cold War was also located in Munich. So and all the minorities of Soviet Union, of course,
yes,
they had
yes,
their centers.
And there was also, just to remind you, there was also headquarters of Radio Free Europe in Munich,
Yes.
which was broadcasting also in Polish at that time, yes. And of course, we have a lot of literature, for instance, when it comes to Radio Free Europe and similar initiatives that actually they were run by American intelligence, yes. So
the Uyghur...
it's really a hub.
So the Uyghur topic, when we were speaking about Tibet, which is maybe more located really in the US and maybe in some Hollywood hashish bars and so on, I don't know. But when it comes to the topic of Uyghurs, you really find a lot in Germany and also in the European Parliament with activities. That is historically really also grounded there. And we shouldn't forget that you estimated Turkey, and I think everyone would think that Turkey is hosting this, because Turkey is the most powerful ally, of course, of Uyghur interests, or what they think Uyghur interests are, since for the pan-Turkic ideology, the Uyghur are East Turkmen people, so they are not just cousins of the Turks, they are Turkic peoples. And in the pan-Turkic ideology, all Turks should be sooner or later united within one borderline, within one country.
Exactly.
And Turkey is at the same time, of course, one of maybe for many decades was one of the most important countries of NATO as well, and was really pampered also by the Americans with money and war material. So that is all quite interesting, and there were things happening under the radar. Also during the Syrian war. I'm sure you know about this, but I'm not so sure if our audience knows about this, that Uyghur militias were fighting in the Turkish orchestrated groups against the Syrian army in Syria in the war, and that there is even, I think it is somewhere in the northwestern part, somewhere not so far from Aleppo, that whole Uyghur families even were moving into a Syrian village, which was devastated, and to settle them there. So this is a serious topic, it's a serious subject. We speak about terrorists from Uyghur lands coming via Turkey to Syria, and now we talk because it becomes more interesting. There are stories which don't seem to be totally unrealistic, that some Uyghur fighters were rewarded with Turkish passports. And when we know that between Turkey and the European Union we have a visa agreement which enables Turkish passport holders to travel to the European Union, we speak also about the security threat for whole European Union in this context.
Well, I guess that the main aim of inviting and transporting the Uyghur fighters to Syria was actually to train them and to take them back to Xinjiang and to destabilize the situation there, I guess, yes, because the terrorist threat in China is one of let's say the main goals of several Western powers, I mean US in particular. But anyway, let's go back to Tibet for a while.
Yes.
So Tibet is far more, of course, the Uyghur problem. I think it would be quite interesting, maybe for our listeners to discuss in one of our next podcasts the whole very complex Uyghur problem, yes, and the situation there. But coming back to Tibet, I think that they are more into using, let's say, soft power compared to the hard power of the Uyghurs, yes. So they are definitely more peaceful, I guess. Anyway, having that potential, I mean the PR potential, they also have some potential to let's say, destabilize the situation in whole Western China, including the autonomous Uyghur region, because they are bordering, yes, and practically the transport, the infrastructure which goes to Tibet and from Tibet is quite well interconnected with the infrastructure, the transport infrastructure of the Uyghur Autonomous Region. That's why I think there are no coincidences. I mean, we had several years of relatively quiet situation in the borderlands of China and India. And then suddenly we had the skirmishes there, yes, and some conflicts there, and it is exactly about the Tibetan issue. I think it was orchestrated and it was coordinated. Yes, on the one hand, the Americans are telling again about the possibility to recognize the independence of Tibet. At the same time, we have this, by the way, very strange skirmishes between Chinese and Indian soldiers on their border. You have heard that they were throwing the stones at each other.
Yes.
So it was quite, let's say, fortunately it was not a bloody tragic conflict, but rather something which might seem not very serious. Anyway, there was a tension, a kind of political and military tension on the border. And just to remind one thing, we had once it was quite a long time ago, but in 1962 we had a very short but regular war between China and India, which was actually a war concerning also the questions of Tibet. So we have already an experience in the history of the 20th century of Tibet being a kind of destabilizing factor for the whole region, particularly for the Chinese-Indian relations. Anyway, I suppose that we should really let's say observe and try to read and analyze what is going on around Tibet, and also what is going on with the reaction of U.S. Political establishment after introducing this bill we were talking about. Yes, I mean, what will be the reaction, the first reaction of Trump's administration? That might be quite interesting, as Trump's administration is quite well known for unconventional reactions, let's say. Yes.
I have a question. I would be really interested in your estimation, or better, in your opinion. I mean, we totally agree that those strategists in the US know exactly what they are doing when they are proposing that bill for recognizing Tibet and for the consequences of that bill. I think there is no dispute between us that they know exactly what they want. They know exactly that they want to destabilize China. And we can totally agree that the Chinese side knows exactly what that has to mean. But I would like to know from you, when we look to Europe, and Europe is also an important player between China and between US. We just spoke some podcasts ago about the conflict between China and US and the role of Europe. What is Europe playing there? But what do you think? How many of the politicians in Europe who express their sympathy for the Tibetan cause, or who are supporting somehow the Tibetan cause of independence, how many of those politicians are really aware about what they are doing and what they are supporting?
Well, I'm a little bit more optimistic because we have another news coming just those days, yes, and I mean the news about G7 summit, yes. You have heard that it has been postponed.
Yes.
It was supposed to be organized in June, and then after Angela Merkel, by the way, rejected the idea of participation in the summit in US, Trump has postponed it to September. And by the way, he invited there, which is quite interesting, he invited there additionally countries which are not members of the G7 group, which means South Korea, that means also Australia, but it's not so important in this context, and India. which means that this will be probably a kind of anti-Chinese summit of G7 group. Trump has already announced that one of the topics of the summit to be discussed there in the US in September will be the Chinese threat for the world, yes? Which means that the European leaders, or at least the most important European leaders, are not so keen and are not so willing to go into an open conflict with China. That's why I think personally that most of the European countries wouldn't be ready, for instance, to take such a step as recognizing, even formally, even officially, recognizing the independence of Tibet for the moment being. Yes, Europe now is hesitating. I don't really think that any of the serious countries, of course, if you are talking about the countries which are, let's say, 100% controlled by U.S. embassy, respective embassies of United States in Europe, then of course those countries might support the idea coming from Washington, but in case of Germany, in case of France, well, I would doubt if they would be ready to take the same step as the American Republican congressman did, yes?
So now I feel a little bit more relieved. Thank you. No, of course. I mean, one can say whatever he wants about Angela Merkel and about guys like Macron, but I think when it comes to these things, they are really aware. But I see, of course, also what let me call it, it's the second row of politicians, how they are talking and how they are ranting when it comes to these topics. And there I have to say, I sometimes wonder if these people, where they get their information from. They are not even as wise as the Dalai Lama in these things, I have to say.
Yes, that's why Dalai Lama is a hugest intellectual for them. Yes,
that is a nice.
For the moment being, they are. It's their master and a kind of idol for them. Yes.
Yes. So I think we come slowly to the end. We can end with some wise words of the Dalai Lama. When the sun shines, it will rain afterwards.
Yes, exactly. Let us think about it till our next meeting and our next podcast, because I think it was really a kind of deep philosophical thought.
Yes, I simply, after I said it, I'm trying somehow to catch it, and it is too deep right now for me. But I have to sleep one night over it.
Yes, that's why we'll need to think about it for a few days now. Yes.
And again, last word, because now I feel really guilty. To all housewives, we love you. You are our best. Please.
Yes, you are one of our best listeners, and we hope thousands and hundreds of thousands of you will listen to our podcast.
And listen to us soon again. Thank you and bye-bye.
Thanks a lot. Bye. Hear you soon.
This program was presented to you by Manuel Ochsenreiter and Mateusz Piskorski, the hottest dissident who won't violate any time the global rules against racism, extremism, or any other bad isms.